Slavery was an economic venture. And when it no longer was economically expedient, that's when, oh, morally it's wrong. Okay, it was morally suspect from the beginning. So the last time we left off, looking at colorism in the Caribbean, we were reading from this book here, Jamaica in Slavery and Freedom, History, Heritage, and Culture. And one of the things that chapter 4 is telling us is that European culture didn't take root necessarily as much as it did in North America. And one of the reason is that they were not successful in making Jamaica or the certain places in the Caribbean a full-on settlement where they're going to grow and populate and build. And it was more like an outpost, a satellite office where you were getting these cash crops and building your place in Europe, or building your place more so in Europe. But later on, you travel to America, and this is the place that they wanted to build and rule, right? So let's continue. It was not meant to be. In 1661, when Charles II made Jamaica a royal colony, the Crown provided a number of measures such as confirmation of land titles to soldiers and civilians. Just make up stuff. Just take a piece of paper and just go people land where people already did the native, the Tejanos, everybody did their mind and business, and you decree and declare. Say you're going to take over the people them things. Sorry, side point. Let's continue. The confirmation of a head right system and the granting of English law to the colony to promote settlement. And we know before the English had it, the Spanish had it, right? Governors were instructed not to cause planters any necessary impediment, nor to discourage the access of new planters, because it wasn't the easiest place to come and set up shop, right? Governor colonists and the crown encouraged settlement even after Jamaica became a flourishing plantation economy. It's important. It was a plantation economy, okay? Later on, maybe we learn, well, what does that look like, and why. Again, like I keep saying, watching slave movies that took place here may not necessarily look like the plantation economy from the Caribbean. For example, Governor William Beeston begged the Board of Trade to relax the acts of navigation, believing that if this were done, the country would be full of people and trade, because we read before that it was slow to increase. It was slow to increase in number of people. Let's continue. Sir Nicholas Laws, governor in 1717, was confident that there was room in Jamaica for 100,000 families, and urged the Board of Trade to extend credit to new settlers and to increase the supply of Africans. So we know the people they was talking about was Europeans. Hey man, come on over and settle. There's space. There's room for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And the urge and urged the Board of Trade to extend credit. I read that. Acts limited black employment in white occupations, and people who did not employ a sufficient number of whites were fined. Very interesting, because again, we're going to start talking about colorism. Here goes one point. It started to be written into the laws. Remember, this whole thing, in addition to other things, but one of the primary things is about economy. Slavery was an economic venture. And when it no longer was economically expedient, that's when, oh, morally it's wrong. Okay, it was morally suspect from the beginning, but it was economically expedient. So when it's no longer economically expedient, then it's like, oh yes, no bother with it again. Here we see that they wanted to limit acts, that means laws, black employment in white occupations. What does that mean? It sounds like Jim Crow. It sounds like uh, Reconstruction. It sounds like what was going on here in a very different way. So getting access to certain skills and experience is limited because of your skin color. So that colorism, that color line was being built up by the ruling colonizer class. All right, I pulled up an article real quick. A failed settler society, marriage and demographic failure in early Jamaica. What are we trying to establish? Why are we thus, right? By Trevor Bernard, University of Canterbury. Jamaica in the 18th century was the jewel in Britain's imperial crown. According to any number of criteria, Jamaica was the most important colony held by Britain in British North America. Jamaica contributed the most of any colony to the imperial coffers. Money, them they wanted money. They need to take all kind of sitting from the land, and that's why for them it was the best quote business, you know what I mean, adventure that they had going in the Caribbean. Its leading inhabitants were the wealthiest citizens in the British Empire and among the wealthiest of subjects of the British monarchy. Moreover, the only colonies to play any significant role within the British establishment were Jamaicans. William Beckford, Lord Mayor of London in 1760, being the most notable example. And there's a whole documentary. I don't know if you guys have seen the documentary about William Beckford and the Beckford family and the Beckford estate. It's on YouTube. It's an excellent documentary looking at, or is it a documentary or a reenactment? I think it's a little bit of both, kind of looking at that whole period of sugar and how it exploded on the scene and made people rich, right? Jamaica was important not only in economic terms, even though the population of Jamaica remained substantially below mainland colonies such as Virginia and Massachusetts throughout the 18th century. Jamaica attracted sizable more migrants, the majority being unwilling coerced slaves from Africa. Did he say sizable migrants and then proceed to tell us that they were unwilling coerced slaves from Africa? You know what? Than any other colony in the century before the American Revolution. That's another story about the distribution, but that kind of touches a little bit about the distribution, right? Yet, what was so clear to contemporaries has not been so evident to later historians. Okay, let's jump down. Struggling settlers in Jamaica, just as on the mainland, sought to cement an enduring presence in an alternately inviting and hostile environment. They attempted to create a genuine settler society, right? With a distinctive cultural identity that was a mixture of inherited metropolitan assumptions and new colonial experiences. Then did I try, but it never did I work. Okay. Nevertheless, during the course of the 18th century, Jamaica's experience increasingly diverged from mainland patterns of development. So basically they had like, yo, this is the model we have. And the book was telling us about Barbados being a prototype and how the colonies in America was a prototype, but Jamaica was just not, it was not doing what they wanted it to be doing. Okay, so let's continue. It says here, while on the continent, increasingly successful European settlement produced a slow but powerful cultural and social convergence, white colonists in Jamaica faced considerable problems in transforming their society into a tropical replica of British society. It didn't work. It didn't work. Them did have problems. It didn't work. How does this lead into colorism and how it's going to lead into? But this is the foundation of colorism in the Caribbean, and namely right now we're looking at Jamaica. Jamaica was a fully fledged and remarkable successful plantation society by the 18th century, but the 17th century attempt to establish a lasting white settler presence in the island had not been successful. Again, which would mean that there was way more melanated people than European people. So just to liken it to what we read in Sedella's account, Bob Marley's mother, Norval would have been an anomaly in that area. He would have stuck out like a sore thumb, which he did, because the majority of people now, way past this time, into the mid 1940s, right? The majority of people are melanated, right? That still have parts of their culture intact from coming from Africa, coming from mainland. A lot of that, there wasn't enough seasoning, quote unquote, like they used to call it, that the European could do, because there wasn't enough manpower to, quote, break the people, right? So because they weren't able to break the people physically in that way, much like they did here in the mainland continent, it happened in another way. But let me just continue. I'm not going to read the whole of it, but this is an interesting article. There were a few settlers of long standing in the island, and there was, as Edward Braithwaite has argued, a discernible Creole identity among native-born white Jamaicans. But Creole settlers were overwhelmed by other presence in the island, ensuring that social patterns to continue to exhibit marked transitory and impermanent characters. So instead of the European, this is what I'm getting. Y'all tell me what you get. Instead of the European influence affecting the melanated people, it was the melanated people affecting the European. And so you will see that there's not much different between a white Jamaican or any other Jamaican out of many one people, because one side was stronger and it pulled the other side into the culture, right? Creole settlers were unaware to create a consensus about what Jamaican identity would be or should be. Instead, the dominant tone of the place was largely set by expatriate English and Scottish immigrants who had no intention of making Jamaica their home, and by the large majority of brutalized African slaves who gave clear evidence in several large scale slave rebellions that they had an entirely different idea from white Creoles about what life in Jamaica should be. And that Scottish, if you listen a little bit to the Scottish Cockney, to the Scottish accent, you do hear a lot of that influence in the patois, right? So this is interesting. Let me read just a little more and then we're going to summarize some thoughts. Scholars had not given much attention to what can be seen as the failure of a settler society to develop in Jamaica. When people be like, yo man, yard people different man, Jamaican people rest are weird, them not come in like, you seeing why? Them not come in like the rest of the people, and what wrong with yard? It's a different place. You're seeing why it didn't take hold. You plant something but it never catch. Okay? From morning me sow me seed, I know no it can catch. I gotta do a little jackyard. Dry? Okay, sorry. The success of plantation complex in 18th century Jamaica and the social structure that it engendered gives a degree of inevitability to its establishment and character in Jamaica. Yet alternatives to plantation agriculture were always possible in the 17th century had been actively pursued.
Island Twist follows Jackie Brown, a young girl who finds herself head over heels for the new island boy at school in fresh outer yard, and Jackie has the fever. But as she navigates the ups and downs of her new crush, things quickly spiral out of control when her not so secret admirer becomes determined to sabotage her relationship. So check out the new novel Island Twist over on Amazon today. Now back to the story.
Let's jump down just a little bit more. It says, as early as the 1670s, blacks formed a majority of population, and the presence of such a large black majority soon came to shape every aspect of society in Jamaica. The formation is not the same. So we have to look at these nuances if we're really trying to understand what we're looking at, right? And overstand and understand and overstand and understand. White Jamaicans came to depend on blacks for the economic well-being, but feared being overwhelmed, both culturally and physically, by their numerical predominance and their unassimilability. The Jamaican government made occasional attempts to foster white settlement in the island. That's what we read in the book, right? Passing deficiency laws, for example, where planters were fined if requisite numbers of whites able to serve in militia were not present on their plantation. Nevertheless, white population growth continued to lag, and the gap between white and black population increased to what Jamaica official believed were alarming levels. Failed settler society. It says in Jamaica, demographic failure prevented the establishment of a settler society. Continuing high mortality among white settlers meant that white numbers could not be maintained by natural increase alone. They never did have enough picnic. This failure was crucially important in shaping the character of fully fledged plantation society that emerged in early 18th century, a society characterized by large imbalances between the sexes and especially between races, by the widespread absenteeism of many of the most influential members of society, and by continuing population instability and slowness in developing a recognizable homegrown Creole consciousness. Moreover, the transformation of Jamaica into plantation society in itself accentuated these trends and hindered the development of a settler society and settled institution. Boy, when them in a them paper, yeah, me read a lot of them. They love to say the same thing 152 different way. We don't hear what you say already. It couldn't happen. It never worked. You never have enough manpower. There was no staying power. Why? We see the terrain, the people, the everything. It was a no. So what happened was you had to find other ways and means to control now this very large black population. So there we have it. As we can see, based on what we just read, some of the nuances and differences that we see in Jamaican culture is coming from the history, the inability of the colonizer to colonize this very prosperous colony, all of these colony and colonizers, in the same way that they did mainland America. Remember, mainland America is also being colonized by the British at this time. Virginia, Maryland, the Eastern Seaboard, right? So it wasn't working. The terrain, the people, it was just a whole convergence of it's not gonna happen. Not in the way you think. And so much of the European is being influenced now by the stronger African culture than they were in mainland America. And I keep juxtaposing because when we get to Marcus Garvey, I think all of this information is important when we looking at why he saw the difference. So how did they then keep the people in check? And we saw, as we just read, there were laws, there were acts that were put in place to penalize the European for not elevating his brother. So then it was built into the system. This injustice now is built into the system. So let's stay tuned for more part 3 on colorism in the Caribbean and how they incrementally got to the point that we are today. So with that said, thank you for tuning in.